This is The Fabulist. I'm Joel Pilger, and I'm diving deep into the intersection of creativity and commerce with little more than my curiosity and a microphone. Along with my generous collaborators at Coop Studios, I'm traveling the world to gather all the insights that studio leaders need but are way too busy to grasp. I'm talking to the motion makers, the fable finders, the storytellers. If you're running a disruptive enterprise in motion or animation, live action, sound or music, experiential, I'm here to celebrate you for not merely participating in the industry, but for reinventing it. Because the future isn't just coming at us, it's being created. So let's get after it. In terms of framing this up for us, there's this idea that creatives, and especially those in business that are running a studio or running a production company, they want something, but they need something else, right? They're all like, man, if we could just get in front of the right people, or if I could just get in and show them how brilliant my cool ideas are, and we'd win that big budget, like we see those other guys doing over there, and we'd be famous and rich or whatever it is. Although that is a true desire, and I don't mean to criticize it, there's a deeper thing that I feel like the creatives, they sense it. They know there's something deeper going on that is holding them back or frustrating them, but they don't know how to get at it. And they don't even really know what it is. So am I tracking on a similar wavelength of what's on your heart and what you want to get out and share with people?
Yeah, I think the thing that resonates with what you're saying is we sort of have this fantasy of quote unquote how the industry works. And we think that there's going to be some golden ticket, some magic nugget that's going to finally unlock what it is that makes the industry work. But I think that is a little bit naive, that there is some secret recipe out there somewhere and we're finally going to understand exactly how to grow our business, exactly how we want to do only the creative projects that are exciting to us. And we sort of have this pie in the sky story that we tell ourselves. And I can only speak from my experience, but what I have noticed in myself is if you're looking at how an industry works, an industry is comprised of a bunch of different companies that engage in different styles of exchange with each other. And it's going to be as unique as the person you're talking to at whatever studio, whatever brand, whatever firm is in conversation with you. And it's very unique from person to person. I've never had any two engagements go really even in a similar way. I try to template out certain steps in like my deal making and my proposal process and my deck writing process. But the interpersonal element of it is so nuanced. It's so different. It's just an opportunity for pattern interruption. If you're thinking in terms of how the industry works or cracking the code, as it were, maybe pause and take a step back and just look at improving interpersonal savvy as a good first step.
We sum up in this very nerdy word that you and I call positioning. We've been vibing on this big idea for years, and it's this infinite riddle. Okay, so if I was going to just ask you in your own words, what the hell is that and why is it such a big deal? Maybe let's start there.
My journey with this idea of positioning, you were the first person that really sparked that curiosity in me to figure out more about it, how to use it, how to harness it. And I went back to the guys who wrote the book on it. To be honest, the book by Jack Trout and Al Rees, I want to say, Positioning, published in the 80s. Yep. Incredible book.
Yep.
And they define positioning as that little space in the client's brain that you occupy. And I love that definition of it because I tested this out with a group of entrepreneurs one time. I asked them, I said, okay, so everyone in the room, we're all familiar with Nike. What does Nike mean to you? And I had all 5 of them tell me their top keywords for what Nike means to them. And a lot of them had stories about sports or working out or any of these different topics that sort of fit in this Nike word cloud. And the thing that really surprised me about that was that everyone gave a very different answer. And so when you think about positioning being that space that you occupy in the mind of your client, you need to start realizing that it's the average. If you look at your brand image, it's the average of everyone that knows about you and what they associate you with. And that's where you can start adjusting the levers on it a little bit.
Yeah, that's a good definition because my sort of working definition is very similar. It's simply a strategy that enables your brand to occupy a distinct position in the mind of your client. The way that I like to boil it down is think of your dream opportunity, your dream client, that prospect, that brand, that company, that partner that you would just die to work with that company, right? Now imagine that person gets a brief, slides across their desk. That person picks up that brief and reads it. What is the thing that makes them immediately think of you? Where it's a choice of one. Oh man, I got to call Dominic. That, I think, is the snapshot of the power of positioning. It's a nerdy word, but man, when you look at what it actually does, it's awesome. So what's your take on that?
Ultimately, you're in a competition with yourself to present as clear a picture as possible. Here's the conversation I have with myself. Your dream opportunity is on the other side of a language you don't speak. It's on the other side of taking a risk. It's like any relationship. There is no love without risk. There's going to be trade-offs to you drilling down into something really specific. And you could say narrow, but I think specific is a more clear way to say it, because what we're talking about with creative firms specifically is, what is your creative discipline? What is it that you're leading in? And yeah, I think that's the mechanism. If you have a clear space that you're leading in, and part of it is you'll know when you're on the right track when you have a lot of intellectual property around it. A lot of people think that it's a tagline and it's words that live on your website. And that might be a good start because you can start trademarking and building an operating system around those things. But when you start having trademarks and patents and copyrights and materials to show people, then you start getting invited to things. People go, oh, I thought of you immediately. You need to submit for this. You need to apply for that. You need to meet my friend. And then you start being able to get all the meetings that you want. And that doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to close all those things or that maybe you'll even close more than you normally would. But you start to see that avalanche start to materialize a little bit, and then you end up in different rooms.
That's a beautiful contrast to the myth that I would call the myth of great work, right? Like, we just do all this great work and hey, world, all you people out there, here's all this great work that we've done. You should just be able to infer from our work that we're awesome and therefore you should hire us. And what I find breaks down there is often the clients and the buyers you're following, they actually don't know what great work is. They don't know what it should cost. They don't know what it takes to do that. They're actually looking for an expert who can guide them to create something new that hasn't yet been created.
The real myth is that an A+ is the price of admission in the business world. There's no one that's going to give you a high five just because you make stuff that's industry standard, adequate, able to go on broadcast, able to go on Netflix. That's the technical requirement of being able to even be considered. So creatively, where are you leading? What's a process or what's a philosophy that's uniquely yours? What's an operating system that's uniquely yours? So often, especially in entrepreneur speak, we're talking about scale. We're always told that we should be built to scale, or it's like everything is about how big can the business get. And some of the, as it relates to creative businesses specifically, some of the best things you can do, whether it's in your marketing or your production pipeline or your creative practice itself, they're not scalable. They're by definition nuanced and rare and scarce. And it's a lot of work to write 1,000 letters by hand. That's why people would rather send an automated email through MailChimp and crop dust everybody. But is it going to be as effective as 1,000 handwritten letters? And so we just have to be willing to actually make things with our hands, I think, at a certain point. You have to be willing to go and do some bespoke work to stand out a little bit.
You back there mentioned a few things that you have either crushed of late, dabbled in of late, explored. So I'm going to use that as a nice little reminder to reset the room and ask, who is Dominic? Because we haven't done that yet.
Yeah, for sure. Like any great scene, we came in right in the middle.
Yeah,
so
there it is.
My name's Dominic DiMaria, and I am an artist. My background is primarily when I was early teens, I got into cameras and photography and Photoshop and graphic design and started dabbling with computers. And I would call myself in the early days definitely a photographer, but a bit of a creative technologist. I was interested in visual effects and building my own hardware and things like that. And eventually just evolved into doing films. I was writing and directing shorts. And just by way of trying to find ways to pay for that expensive hobby, I started directing commercials and shooting commercial and editorial photo. And when I was in my late teens, I think I was 17 because I wasn't actually legally able to get on any of the paperwork. But my first production company, I started with my brother, my older brother. And yeah, we started doing commercial video work, and that sort of opened up this world of being a pro and trying to learn how to start and run a profitable company in media, in production. And the last 10 years or so, I've been between Los Angeles and New York. Produced a handful of independent feature films, directed a couple of those as well. And I'm the co-founder of Audie, which is the fine art studio that's known for preserving luxury memorabilia in sculpture.
I hear director, I hear artist, I hear entrepreneur as well, all sorts of things in your background. And if it's okay, I'd like to also mention that you went through an incredibly unfortunate and formative experience where you suffered a terrible accident and spent, I want to say, a few years recovering. And I mention that because when I think of your story, I feel like that's such an important element in something that woke you up to be the person that you are today. Would that be a fair characterization?
Yeah, I think I can talk about that a little bit. It was definitely a profound experience. And essentially what happened is one evening I was just riding my bicycle straight through a green light with traffic, and someone from oncoming traffic turned left in front of me and took me out, fractured my skull, lost all my front teeth, impact injuries to my joints. And it was a pretty intense experience. I spent a couple years between the physical therapy and the psychological therapy, and obviously the financial element as well. It was pretty financially devastating. So yeah, it took me a good 2 years to work through all the recovery. And a big part of that was I couldn't really afford to do anything but work. I ended up losing the house that I was renting. I moved back in with my parents. I had this really ironic experience of moving back in with my parents into their guest room, which had previously been my bedroom. So I'm like literally a guest in my own space. And this funny thing happened where the only extracurricular I could afford was HBO. So I was taking every production job I could find and just working as much as possible. And I watched a movie every day for those 2 years. I watched a film every single day.
Wow.
And I did nothing but write and direct and produce projects during that time. And I was scheduled to move to Los Angeles a month after the accident occurred. And obviously that got delayed. But it's just these crazy moments in life because I ended up 2 years later, after recovering, having a dozen more work samples and a lot more experience doing the things that I was interested in doing. So that when I showed up to LA within a month, I had a manager. Pros and cons.
The thing that I appreciate about that story, which again, most of us hearing that can't even imagine the misery and pain and struggle and all that goes with that. But what I find so interesting about you is you have this, I think you've used the phrase like living on borrowed time mentality that expresses itself in a why hold back? Like, why play small? And I'm just curious, why is everybody playing so freaking small?
It's a great question. And I'll be very judicious about not critiquing my peers in the industry. Like, I'm not here to tell anyone that they're doing anything wrong.
Yeah.
But what I will say is nobody is forcing you to do this. If stability and consistency and the things that are associated with a softer experience of life are your top priorities, that is not what being a creative entrepreneur really involves on a daily basis. It can become that. You can build your business to a certain point that it is more of those things. But in my personal creative practice, I keep finding myself drilling down on the power of perspective. And that manifests for me because the way that I grew up, I think impacts my life and my career in certain ways. We moved around a lot. We moved 4 or 5 times before I was 12 years old. And I have continued to keep up that trend in my adult life where every year I'm somewhere else. My projects will take me. I had a project that took me to New York City for 2 years. And they just, you have to, I think, realize, you have to accept that some of the elements that we really desire are contradictory to the realities. A familiar face to you and I is Blair Enns. Been a big fan of a lot of his material for a long time. One of the things that he has coined is this, what he calls the inefficiency problem, how innovation and efficiency are opposing forces.
Yep.
And I just see it manifest every day in my work, because when I have the opportunity to talk about some of the projects that we've done, some of the intellectual property that we've created on our own through our studio, Das Audie, what I see is how much risk it took to even get to the point where we can be like in a go-to-market strategy. Like all the pre-seed, money, work, time, that stuff it's where all the good stuff happens before you even get to market, before you even get to publish anything. It's all this risk of innovating and spending and trying and the R&D. And it is so intense, but it's the results. There's nothing more fun than getting to something really original. Like when you Google something and it just truly doesn't exist, and then you work for 2 years on something and then you Google it again and it's all you. It's nothing but you for 2 pages. That is that is called a unique position.
Well, I'm thinking of this moment when I was at your studio. I think this was pre-COVID, when you first showed me a pair of crazy famous sneakers embedded in clear lucite? I don't know what the name of this material is. And it was
the acrylic.
Yeah, right. And it was a coffee table with these sneakers embedded in it. And I was like, I don't even know what I'm looking at. What, famous and this and that. So this is a little bit of me backfilling for anyone that just heard that story you told and they're wondering, wait a minute, what are you specifically talking about? And it's this journey that you went on because you and a business partner had an idea and you said, let's go all the way and go hard. And it sounds like it was a 2+ year process of creating something totally new, totally innovative, where, right, like today I could Google what, and I would see your art.
Yeah, well, what we invented, and I'll get into some of the background of this, but specifically the design, the innovation that's really taken the center stage is the sneaker hoop.
Okay.
And I remember when you came to the studio to see that's when it was only the sneaker tables back in the day, but it was literally a germ of an idea. What happened was, during COVID, at the time, he was just a friend of mine. I was in New York, he was here in LA, and Tucker Audie is an artist. At the time was focused mostly on his acting career. Very talented actor, comedian, host. But he had this secret skill set that nobody knew about, which was fabricating and doing construction since he was 12 years old. So in the middle of the pandemic, because options were so limited with work and a lot of our businesses were shut down, he started making a lot of housewares by hand. And it just so happened that he sent me something in the mail, and it was this coaster, like this small tabletop coaster, but it had cigarettes embedded in it, like used cigarette butts. And on one hand, it's so like, it's got that shock factor of like, these are cigarettes in this coaster. but it's also just cool. It's like, it's not germy or anything. They're embedded inside of it. And so it has this incredible like aesthetic quality to it. And in that same package, he sent me a bunch of stuff that he had made that he was working on. And I called him and I was like, man, I had just come off a film project that I had produced and directed. And I was looking at what I was going to do next. And I called him and I was like, man, I think that we should like consider doing a project together around some of your design work. And what I didn't know at the time is that day he was actually he was at the mechanic shop because his car had broken down. And he had been working at a major studio that everyone would recognize. I won't say the name, but it's one that we've all heard of in this space. But during the pandemic, basically was on furlough. And so he was having a bad day when I called him to pitch him this idea of us working together. And here's what he said to me. He's like, I'm interested in doing that, but what I really want to make is a sneaker table. And I was like, what would that even be? And he was like, no, I want to take a pair of 85 Air Jordan 1s, the OG greatest sneaker of all time, and I want to embed it in an acrylic plank and make a coffee table out of it. And I just said, you're on. So we started, and I basically that was the first investment I made into that project was funding that prototype to be made before we even knew what we were really doing. We didn't know that it was ultimately going to result in, our first patent is the technology that preserves sneakers and memorabilia into these objects. We created that just out of an aesthetic idea of like, what if we could put our Jordans, instead of putting them in a box on the wall, what if we could make them part of the furniture, part of the space? And yeah, we started working on it. I came to LA, we opened the studio, and I had a friend come in from New York, and we just kind of wanted to break in the studio as we're making the first sneaker table. We wanted to kind of get some artists in there, get working, shoot some photos, just kind of like start getting the space working. And my friend, Kosa Frey Chin, is a brilliant creative director out of New York, really good friend of mine. He also played basketball in high school. So he came into our studio space and he was like, man, it's so spacious in here. It's so big. Like, we should be shooting hoops. And it just hit me as soon as he said that. As soon as he was talking about playing basketball in the studio, I was like, we're talking about iconic sports memorabilia. We're talking about embedding them in sculptures. We need to put sneakers in basketball hoops. And the sneaker hoop has really gone on to have a life of its own. But I say that, it's easy to say it's gone on to have a life of its own, but it's been 3 years of R&D. We've just secured our first patent. The second one is pending. We should have it by the end of the year. We've now made, I think, 18 sculptures in 3 different collections. And, we'll finally be going to market this year with actually putting stuff in an art market. And so it's funny because, I talk to people about these, getting to these original ideas. And in the entrepreneurial experience, if you're not working on it, nothing's happening. So what's happened over those last 3 years is that every single day I put in hours. Every single weekend, every single day I put in hours. If nothing's happening, if nothing's coming to me, I'm putting back into the project, whether it's money, time, connections, etc. And the North Star for that project is that, from our perspective and in our opinion, the next Apple doesn't make iPhones. The next Nike doesn't make sneakers. The next Michael Jordan doesn't play basketball. The only next that matters is the next first.
What I love about that story is I want to try and now extrapolate that, because someone might hear that story and be like, oh, that's really interesting. Dominic and his partner are artists. They made this art. They're doing their thing. That's cool. Yay, go make art. But for someone listening, there's a takeaway called, wait, look at the pattern. Like, look at what's actually happening here. What's the meta? Because if I run a creative company, like a production company or a studio or something, what's the lesson? Because there's some sort of a lesson, right? Where you just said, the only thing that matters, right? The next first is what matters. And we can wait for the phone to ring because someone saw our portfolio and they want us to make another one of those commercials or whatever that thing is. We can also say, you know what? I'm going to deliberately put in the time, right? I'm going to put my ass where my heart wants to be, to quote the Stephen Pressfield book I'm reading right now. And put in the time. I'm going to be a pro and build it, create it, make it, whatever it is. And of course, it's going to manifest and express itself through a positioning, which is, I want to put it out in the world in a way that the world can see it, find it, discover it, be curious about it. So what's the like encouragement, as I describe that meta, what's the encouragement you would give to any creative out there in business to be like, you know what, you may not be making the next sneaker, whatever, sports memorabilia embedded in sculpture.
Right.
But don't miss the point that you're making, which is?
Well, the point that I'm making is that it's tying in these two conversations of positioning. And I think the other side of it would be like, I don't know, fulfillment in your career. To me, what I'm going for is first mover advantage. I'm going for that early adoption of, for example, I want to say it was in the 80s, whenever 7-Up came out, they were watching Pepsi just try and fail to take market share from Coke. And instead of trying to go and compete with these two huge beverage companies, what 7-Up decided to do was brand themselves as the Uncola. And they wanted to be the first soda that wasn't cola. And 7-Up's been around ever since. And I think, if I am speaking correctly, they eventually got acquired by one of those two companies. But don't quote me on that because I might be wrong. But the point is, when you're doing something really unique, it's not that if you're a motion graphics person or a live action person that you need to all of a sudden become an expert on fine art sculpture and change your life in that way. But you know it's in there and you know what it needs to be. What is practical is not to follow your passion, it's to follow your skills. And you have to ask yourself how practical you're trying to be.
So let me ask you this, because first of all, I'm going to let everyone know that although maybe I first lit the fuse or the spark of positioning in you, that now you've become my go-to expert, because I'm now coming to you and saying, Dominic, help me, Obi-Wan. This is something about this, when the Jedi, the student becomes the master or something. There's some sort of movie quote in there somewhere. And I now love bringing you into this community that I run of studio founders, where we lean into you as one of our experts to help us navigate this thing we call positioning. So I wanted to ask you about this thing called magnetic, right? This is like a framework, a method. I don't know what you would call it, but I think of it as, there's a process, right? Because I'm going through it right now, and I know you've taken a bunch of other people through the process. This is part of your jam, but what is it?
Yeah, it's been really fun. We've, I think, now had a couple hundred people go through it. And what magnetic is, it's a creative practice that you can always rely on to help you express and articulate your most unique and your most you ideas. I didn't create it out of a desire to do consulting projects or for it to be really what it's become, but it's opened the opportunity for me to talk to so many people. And what the interesting thing about it is, it obviously started with this conversation with creative entrepreneurs, specifically in your community. That's where it was birthed. But I now use it and I teach it to people that are running apps and involved in investing and creating a gym business. And it's created all these applications outside of just creative studios. And the reason that is because it is a series of workflows and creative practices that you can rely on every single day, no matter what you're doing or where you're at, to help you articulate the things that make you unique, to help you articulate what's going on upstairs. And what I've found time after time is that, like I said before, it's already in there. And we end up code switching is the problem. We end up spending our lives as professionals code switching and taking our ideas and manipulating them into things that would work better for LinkedIn engagement instead of just saying what we mean. And so there's this revolutionary act called being honest that is lost on most of the business world. And so if you stop filtering and you go, okay, why would I say it that way when how I want to say it is like this? I want to say it with cuss words in it. That's how you should say it, because the right people, the right audience, the people that are going to invest in you, the people that are going to want to work with you, they're not going to be offended by you being yourself. It's just like dating. If you start the first date by filtering and not expressing yourself, guess what trajectory you just created for yourself? You're never going to be able to be yourself for the lifetime of the relationship, at least without some serious come to Jesus moments. And it's the same in business. If you create a business that you're constantly trying to remember your elevator pitch for, it's so you can say it right, and get the hooks in. You're just missing, because that's bullshit. If you get into the quote unquote elevator with someone and you can't be yourself and you being yourself is not enough, then that is not your client. That is not your partner. That is not your investor. That's not your person. And that's been the biggest, I think, revelation from Magnetic is, so we do it in a group environment, which I love, but I also love these one-on-ones where I'll just ask, I had the opportunity to do this with you. I just asked you, what about this? And then you start talking and I'm like, okay, pause, just write down what you just said, because that's what we're trying to get at. We're trying to not rewrite that. We're trying to not make it more presentable. We're trying to make it really you.
Yeah, it's been really interesting and curious even, because I think one of your prompts, if I remember the way you phrased it, was, what I'm trying to say is.
Yes.
And it's amazing how asking somebody about the how, the what, the why, the who, all these kinds of things, right? The features, the benefits. And then you finally get to this point of what I'm really trying to say is, and what I really mean by that is, and I personally love the point you just made of, if it's not coming out of you authentically and naturally, then what are we doing? Because at the end of the day, don't we really just want to be ourselves and be awesome and be right and be received and heard and embraced by those people who are our people?
Yeah, we always end up going like, well, I wouldn't want to say it that way because that's too nerdy, or I wouldn't want to say it that way because that's too edgy. I wouldn't want to cuss because then I'll get demonetized on whatever platform. And it's like, you should say whatever the fuck you want to say. And for a creative professional, that's the rule. And there are so many people that have become household names in and across the creative industries that will pretty much all tell you the same thing. And that is, they didn't get there by being the most collaborative person in the room. And I'm paraphrasing, but I think David Fincher's a legendary director. And he said, the ugly truth is he fell into this temptation of creating by committee and letting everyone have their voice be heard and get their input. And of course, the result was the projects were completely compromised. And then what happened was, when the shit hit the fan, where did the buck stop? With the committee or with the one guy? And that's really all you need to know. You need to be able to take the reins. And obviously, it doesn't mean that you got to behave in unsavory ways, but it means you got to be the leader in the room and say, my job is to bring my perspective to this project and defend it.
Yeah, there's actually enormous value in having an opinion. But man, having a strong opinion, a very unique point of view. I don't know if you maybe agree or disagree with this statement, but in my experience right now, when people ask me, what's the thing that I should lead with? What's the thing that makes us us? Because everybody gets very hung up on this. We can do anything.
Right.
And I hate that phrase. I get so tweaky and annoyed when I hear people say, we can do that. We can do that. And I'm trying to be kind here, but nobody cares what you can do. What people get really excited about is, what is your point of view? What is your perspective? What is your angle, right? I'm trying to find the right word here, but I always come back to POV, because the reason I go to Dominic is I want that point of view. I go to that shop because of that point of view. And that encapsulates a whole bunch of things.
Yeah, I think another way to say it is that you got to have a way in. And if you can do anything, look, that's a really simple thing to counter. If you can do anything, then you do nothing. And that's a hard pill to swallow because, you want to be celebrated for all these things that you can do. You want to be celebrated for the breadth or skill set or something. But I like to get celebrated with dollars. That's the main thing I'm trying to get celebrated with. So the way in is, here's how we would do it. And for that to be a truly unique way to go about it, that it's the only way to stand out. If you have five creators or 5 studios standing in a line and they can all do anything, they're all great at everything, who do you pick? But you got one person that goes, oh shit, I don't know if we're in the right room, but how we would do it is this wild card way. By default, you're going to be the standout option. There's controversy that comes with originality. One of the things that we've experienced is, and I won't even call it pushback because it's not really pushback, but there's the shock value where people go, could we take the objects out of the sculpture at some point? And the answer is a big, fat, hairy no. It's a fossilization process. These priceless items are technically being destroyed by embedding them in these sculptures. You can't use them again. But guess what? People aren't using memorabilia again anyway. It's to be preserved. So we can take that half-life and extend it for literally thousands of years with this process. That's what we're going to do. But then we have this practice that's so unique to us that people go, oh, have you heard of whatever other artists? And there's a few artists that do like sports adjacent things. There's a few studios that you could maybe say we're in a genre with, but they are not doing what we're doing. And we are not doing what they're doing. And that's why it would be a joy and a privilege to exhibit with these people, to collaborate with these people, because they're the only place in the world to do X, but we're the only place in the world to do our thing.
Yep.
And it breeds yes and territory.
Yeah, you're reminding me of this thought, and this is a very optimistic thought, so bear with me. But the thought that I think when every creative creator or maker in the world is properly positioned, I think of it like when the world went from 8-bit color to 16-bit color to 32-bit color, like that rainbow of different points of differentiation is nearly infinite because there's 16.7 million different hues. And guess what? You get to pick one and own it. Right? We're not in 256-bit color, right? Where there's only 256 colors in 8-bit land, right? There's this infinite rainbow. So you can hang out here as an artist and then someone just adjacent to you who's doing something similar, but just a tiny bit different. And you are like best friends. Let's exhibit together. That's super cool.
Yeah, it really is. And it creates this celebration of the creative process, because then everyone can come in. And one of the most beautiful things about doing something that's really original, that's really different, is when people, especially artists, but I should say not exclusively artists either, other like just the public, the audience, whenever people see these sculptures, they immediately look up and they go, oh, it'd be cool if you did whatever. Because everyone's got their sneaker that they want to see. Everyone's got their player that they want to have the capsule with. Everyone's got their idea, their colorway, their material. They want to do one with leather, and they want to do one with brocade fabrics involved, and they want to do no sneakers at all. So there's all these, you're onto something when other people see it and start dreaming things up with it. That's how you have an operating system to work with.
I'm going to also mention another aspect of this. Let's talk about money for one quick second. And then I'm going to try and bring us to a close here. But in the example where you talked about half a dozen studios all lined up and they're all saying, yeah, we can do that. We can do that. We can do that. You can all do it. If all can do it, how do you pick, right? As a buyer, how do you choose who to work with? And this is where people start saying, oh, we can do it for a little bit less than the guy next to me. So when people start bemoaning this race to the bottom and this process of ephemeralization where every year we were being asked to do more for less. I just want to submit that this is, I think your framework and positioning, what you do in magnetic, is an antidote to that, because you're not going to be standing there in a room saying, yeah, we can do that. And they say, really? If you guys can all do this, why would I pick you? If your next thought is because I can probably do it for a little bit less and therefore win the job, that is not a path any of us want to go down.
No, you sacrifice all your bargaining chips. You're left with the only negotiating factor you have is price. And that's a sure way to kill your company, to be honest, unless you're willing to be in a trajectory of downsizing for the rest of the lifetime of your career. And look, there's innovations and things that might make you more efficient and that kind of thing. But yeah, you really don't want to be the cheap option. That's just, it's not gonna bode well for you in the long run.
Yep. Yeah, this infinite variations of hues and colors in that rainbow. When somebody says, hey, Dominic, I want that specific color that is you, then guess what? You, in a way, have a mini monopoly of sorts. So your price is your price, and we can negotiate from there. But it's not about, am I cheaper than the next guy?
Yeah, and that's why it's called magnetic, is because people know that they know exactly. It's like your magnets work with two poles. Magnets work with two poles. You have one side that attracts the other side. And if you have two like sides pointed at each other, they repel. But if you have the two opposite sides, they attract. And I think a lot of times we get lost in the sauce and we try to associate with, I think largely it's FOMO. We have this fear of missing out, that if we're not adjacent to whatever other studios or whatever other brands are in the space, if we're not adjacent to it, that like we're missing. And there's nothing to miss. I don't feel like I've missed a thing for the last 3 years, because I feel like the thing that I'm doing is fascinating to me. And the conversations I get to have around it are fascinating to me, and they're fun and they're interesting, and it's high risk and it's really high intensity, and it feels like a sport. It feels like cardio. It feels, holy shit, like we're doing this thing. Like we are in it, and can we get one more rep? Can we get one more? Can we get to the next level here? And yeah, I think that there's a lot of trends in business that I've had to address my own mentality toward things like social media. I've had the opportunity to run some very successful social media campaigns, but also social media is this, on a personal level, not really great for my mental health. So I got to know where to put that. I'm not going to run a social media agency is what that means. It's not my language. It's not how I think. Will we use it to our best advantage? 100%. Am I going to try to follow all the trends of the algorithm every week? Not really, not on a regular basis. I don't want a social media empire. I'm trying to really drill down and have a great, profitable fine art business. I want my entertainment business to flourish as well. And the things that those businesses have in common is phone numbers are way more valuable than followers.
Meaning you're going after effective, not efficient.
Yeah, I think if I can get the same amount of work done in a week with 5 phone numbers as it might take 5 years on Instagram to do, the answer is obvious to me. I would rather be invisible and do all this. Fame has never been an attractive element of this to me. I think some of it, there's certain publicity profile that is almost necessary for this kind of work. And that's all I have to say about it. It is what it is.
I think that's maybe a good point for us to wrap it up and just let that sort of linger out there, because that's absolutely true. But that's a whole nother conversation. But dude, I appreciate you and the magnetic framework. I'm looking forward to seeing myself getting through this process and how you're going to help me articulate what makes me authentic and remarkable to the world. But yeah, I appreciate your work and just your support for all these creatives out there that are on this journey.
I have to say a million thank yous to you for not only having me today, but also sparking the 7 years ago, you introduced me to this idea, and it's really been a daily fascination ever since. And it's really just been a huge pleasure to be able to explore it, experiment with it inside the community. Hopefully, we get a lot of great feedback every time we do it. And also just for your participation, with your own project. I think we've broken some really fun ground for your brand and your positioning. You're doing great work. It's really fun to see it flourish.
No, thanks, brother. Thanks for listening. And thanks to my collaborators at Coop Studios. To learn more about them, visit coopstudios.com. As for you, if you're focused on running a strong and thriving creative company, consider joining Forum, my private network of the world's leading studios. For details, go to joelpilger.com.